Good afternoon, friends. Uh, I welcome you all in this second part of my talk. Before I begin, I would like to express my thanks to Professor Venugopal and Professor S.S. Joshi for helping me immensely in my understanding on this subject and providing me adequate reading material. Uh, and also, I would like to thank Gyanendra for providing me few slides related to the cortical transit time, which I'm incorporated in this presentation. So, friend, today's topic is antenatal hydronephrosis and how we approach postnatally. Uh, we all know we have improved a lot in last 40 years on our surgical management side, but still it is a mysterious condition that which patient is going to require an operative procedure and which patient can be treated with the observation protocol. So genitourinary tract anomalies constitute almost 20% of totally detected anomalies on ultrasound in prenatal patient. Among that, hydronephrosis constitute almost 1 to 5% of all pregnancy. As per US statistic, it is 1 in 300. But very important is that this child is born without symptoms. So here we are talking about a presumptive diagnosis rather than a symptom. And 50% of this hydronephrotic postnatal kidneys can have a UPGO-like configuration, and that's going to be my main area of today's talk. We all know, as I mentioned in the beginning, that its clinical significance is matter of debate since more than 40 years. Why it is so? This is the antenatal epidural hydronephrosis. This is postnatal first week sonography, but here it is very difficult to say whether it is obstructed system or it is a dilated but non-obstructed system. So Koch in 1988 he defined obstruction by making a statement that restrictions to urinary outflow that left untreated will cause progressive renal deterioration. With that, he made a second statement that current techniques cannot reliably diagnose primary obstruction without including an observation period. So we will talk on both the side, and I always say that it is walking on a tightrope, balancing that which patient is going to require a surgical intervention and which patients can be treated within an observational period. So this slide is very interesting. Give some attention that till in 2010, in a guideline, uh, this was the differential diagnosis quoted in even Journal of Pediatric Urology in 2010 and 2000. Prior to that, in 2000, that common was pelvic junction obstruction. And if you look at this whole list, there is no mention of transient hydronephrosis. But this guideline was revised subsequently in 2010, and which was also published in Journal of Pediatric Urology, as well as many journals of India. And there you can see the transient hydronephrosis is the on the top and constitute of more than 50% of the cases. So there is a paradigm shift in our understanding, and that was probably based on certain excellent work carried out by the pediatric urologist in last 2 decades, and we will see in my subsequent presentation. So, first question which comes to me very commonly is that how will you counsel this patient? Now, I always say that the unilateral hydronephrosis in asymptomatic neonates usually does not require any immediate intervention. So what I do is just reduce the anxiety of the parents, telling them that your baby is all right, his kidney is having a little bit of hydronephrosis, and likely that it may resolve, or accordingly we will do subsequent investigation. Now, second question I get is that whether they are requiring antibiotic prophylaxis or not. Uh, I have two different statements. One is that in absence of ureteric dilatation, where if your sonologist is very much sure, we can avoid the antibiotic prophylaxis. But in a circumstances, uh, it can be given till we are sure we are not dealing with the reflux. That means if we have some doubt uh, in patients with the severe hydronephrosis or hydroureteronephrosis, or you can say uncircumcised male with the hydronephrosis, we can consider giving antibiotic prophylaxis till we don't have a subsequent or serial sonography where we don't picked up any problem with the bladder or lower ureteric dilatation in a full bladder sonography. So what we have traditionally to differentiate between the obstructive or non-obstructive dilatation in asymptomatic child is that one is a morphological criteria that based on the ultrasound, that is a magnitude of hydronephrosis present in serial sonography. Second and third are dependent on the diuretic renal scan, that is relative renal function measured by the renography, and response of radionuclide washout with the proserpine. We are just talking about the asymptomatic child. If there are symptoms, then it is different matter. Symptoms can be of a pain, urinary tract infection. There can be a palpable lump, which I seen for almost 5-6 days, and stone formation. Uh, while thinking about these criteria, as I said, mentioned in the previous slide, there are no absolute indicators of obstruction, and there is still no consensus on the surgical indicators. So we have to start examining this patient for the palpable lump as I palpate a kidney in the left flank in last week in a child with the uretropelvic junction obstruction. Similarly, you can palpate the multicystic dysplastic kidney also in the flank. You have to palpate the pelvis area for the distended bladder in a circumstances like post urethral valve, urethral stricture, or very rarely urethral atresia. Then comes the investigations. We are going to talk in detail about the imaging protocol, leaving the laboratory investigation for discussion on some other time. So this is the postnatal evaluation algorithm, which we most of the people are following in our practice, and that is also available in the guideline, EU guideline of 2020. Now here you can see that postnatal ultrasound, then if suggestive of a dilatation, then whether to do voiding cystoscopy or not, we'll discuss this in detail, because here also EAU says that VCUG in patients without ureteric dilatation is growing controversy, and it is possible that even reflux detected, which is possible in 15 to 25% of patients, has absolutely no clinical effect. And if there is no dilatation, we have to repeat ultrasound after say 4 to 8 weeks, and if still there is no dilatation, we can just follow this patient yearly for a 2 year, and if there is a dilatation, then we have to again follow the same protocol which we follow for the dilated unit. So we start with the ultrasonography, and the first and most important thing is the timing. You have to wait in cases of unilateral hydronephrosis when there is no emergency, at least for 5 to 10 days, as initially child is dehydrated and having a oliguria, so it will not give exact idea about the dilatation of the system. But we may require immediate sonography in first 48 hours, and these are the indications in a cases of suspected PU valve, means infravesical obstruction, in cases with a severe bilateral dilatation, solitary kidney, and when we are feeling that we are likely to lose the patient and parents in the follow-up. So this is the case-based discussion, and I am introducing the first case. Here you can see this patient was picked up in third trimester with the antenatal hydronephrosis. Nothing much was mentioned about the ureter, and bladder was normal, not distended. And the postnatally, you can see that this is the first week sonography with the pelvic dilatation of almost 22 millimeter in anterior posterior diameter. And this was majority was of extrarenal pelvis, and no much of a chalazial dilatation. So this patient was kept on a follow-up with antibiotic prophylaxis, as patient was coming from the very uneducated family as well as poor setup. And sonography was repeated at 12th week. There you can see that uh, pelvic dilatation is reduced to 20 millimeter, and some central chalazial dilatation is seen. But patient is still asymptomatic. Patient has not developed any urinary tract infection in say 3 months. And considering the sonography finding that there is a regression in the dilatation, VCUG was avoided. And this is what exactly I wanted to uh, elaborate in my first lecture, that we not need to rush for the VCUG in a first or second week in presence of antenatal hydronephrosis. We can just watch the progress in subsequent sonography or serial sonography, and then we can take a decision. So what we are trying to see in sonography, that is the next question. Uh, Make sure that you are sending these cases to one or two sonologists who are having a patients to do sonography of a pediatric urological cases, and then only they will become smarter. They will be will get the adequate cases experience to tell you about the details which you are seeking from him. And we have to see that generally child reaches to the radiologist with a full bladder preferably, and he has to do first full bladder scan for the bladder and the retrovesical ureter for the dilatation, and then he has to see also the upper tract with the full bladder. Then simply by pressing the bladder, the child is likely to void on table, sonography table, and then subsequently with the empty bladder, he has to repeat the upper tract scan, because it makes a lot of difference in the dilatation with the full bladder and empty bladder. So what we are trying to look for in sonography in affected side is the nephromegaly, means the size of the kidney. And in patients with the duplex kidney, there will be remarkable increase in the size in the hydronephrotic kidney, also even in the multicystic dysplastic kidney. Second, in hydronephrotic kidney is anteroposterior pelvic diameter, so APPD. Then we have to look at the chalazial, at the central chalasis as well as peripheral chalazial dilatation, cortical thickness, echogenicity of renal cortex, ureteral dilatation. And on contralateral side, again we have to see for the site of the kidney, size and dilatation. At the bladder level, we have to see the size of the wall, size of the bladder, thickness of the wall. We have to look at the bladder neck hypertrophy, ureterocele-like structure if it is seen, and post-void residual. And with that also we have to look for posterior urethra if there is any dilatation. So all these things you have to mention while you ask the sonography from the sonologist. So it is better that you send sonography to one or two uh, uh, sonologist only, so they know that what exactly they want, and also ask them to give a picture, just not just to give a written report. So you be confident that you have a kidney picture as well as you have a bladder level picture. Addition to this, as Dr. Gyanendra Sharma recommend, that we have to do even the prone position sonography with the empty bladder. Uh, uh, that is having a relevance, and we will talk about that if we get some time. So we have, based on this sonography finding, we have a certain a classification system related to the hydronephrosis. Among that is the most popular one was SFU grading, that is Society Fetal Urology grading of hydronephrosis. There you can see in a grade 0 there is no splitting at the renal sinus. With the grade 1 there will be some split at the sinus of the pelvis. With the grade 2, the intrarenal pelvis as well as extrarenal pelvis is dilated with the major calyces dilated, but still there are minor calyces are not dilated. In SFU grade, we have a minor calyces also, or you can say peripheral calyces are also dilated, but here the parenchyma is preserved, and with grade 4, SFU grade 4, we have a parenchymal thinning appeared with the all other findings. The problem with the SFU grading is that it is a subjective assessment and there are chances of inter-observational variation, especially for high grades of hydronephrosis. So that is limitation of SFU grade, and here you have a sonographic picture. There you can see that this pelvis is dilated of almost 20 millimeter, as well as you can see that all central as well as peripheral calyces are dilated with the some parenchymal thinning. So you can say that this is the SFU grade 4 in this sonography. Another very important classification system which is popular in, you can say, UK and Europe, that is based on the objective finding or objective measurement of the pelvis, that is epidiameter of renal pelvis. If it is 7 to 9, it classifies a mild. If 10 to 15, it is considered as a moderate, and if it is more than 15, it considered as a severe. So it is more objective observation and reporting, and it's combined with the subjective description of the cortex and calyceal dilatation. So here also you can see that this sonography falls into the severe category. Now recently, since 2014, though it is not become very popular, there is another classification system. Mainly I am going to elaborate this for the trainees purpose, that that is the urinary tract dilatation classification system, which was proposed and published into 2014 in Journal of Pediatric Urology. 8 societies were involved in uh, uh, constructing this classification system, though not utilized very much in the practice till today. But you must know about this. The basic aim here in this classification is that you can see that all these 6 ultrasound findings are taken into the consideration. Once again, anteroposterior pelvic diameter, calyceal dilatation with distinction between the central and peripheral calyceal postnatally, renal parenchymal thickness, renal parenchymal appearance means echogenicity, bladder abnormalities, and ureter abnormalities. Now, here the purpose is that in SFU grading system, we were not much talking while giving the SFU classification grade about the ureter and the bladder, and most of the time we also miss to uh, ask the from the sonologist the details about the bladder and ureter. So this classification, when you would like to classify with the UTD classification system, you have to take in under consideration the ureter and bladder findings. That is must. And secondly, that this uniform classification system is utilized for the explaining the parents regarding the further follow-up, uh, how the things will progress, and how frequently they have to go for a follow-up, and likelihood of possibility of surgical intervention. So this is UTD antenatal. It is applicable only after the 16 week of gestation, because after the 14 or 16 week we can categorically picked up the hydronephrosis antenatally. So UTD A1, it is enteroposterior pelvic diameter, which is 4 mm to less than 7 millimeter, and when it is third trimester, it is 7 millimeter to less than 10 millimeter, with or without central calyceal dilatation. And UTD antenatal 2 to 3, that is enteroposterior pelvic diameter in a second trimester more than or equal to 7 millimeter, and in a third trimester more than or equal to 10 millimeter. With that, there is a peripheral callus dilatation, abnormal parenchymal thickness or appearance, abnormal ureter or bladder, and unexplained oligohydramnios. Any of these findings, uh, two or more, constitute UTD antenatal 2 and 3. This is something about the postnatal urine tract dilatation system, which is applicable after the 48 hours of life, that after the oliguria phase is overcome. So UTD P1, that is considered the low risk, where you can see that anteroposterior renal pelvic dilatation is 10 millimeter to less than 15 millimeter with only central callus dilatation. So it is almost mainly talking about the extrarenal pelvis with little bit of pelvic dilatation and central callus dilatation. And UTD P2 that have an intermediate risk. So here the risk is categorized, and accordingly we have to uh, do subsequent investigation, and we have to predict the possible outcome of this child. So UTD P2 constitute anteroposterior pelvic diameter of more than or equal to 15 millimeter, which here we see with the peripheral callus dilatation and abnormal ureter, which was not here in this case. So this picture falls into the UTD P2 category. Then UTD P3, that considered a high risk, there you can see anteroposterior pelvic diameter is more than or equal to 15 millimeter with the peripheral callus dilatation, abnormal parenchymal thickness. Here you have seen thinning is appeared, though there was no abnormal ureter or abnormal bladder. So this image we can categorize in UTD P3. The next investigation in our algorithm is the VCUG, and whether to do VCUG or not, and what are the indication. So these are the indication when we visualize the ureter or dilated ureter on imaging in a serial sonography with the full bladder, 1, 2 or 3, serial imaging with the full bladder. If you visualize or we see dilated ureter, then there is an indication for VCG. So there is no need to hurry it up with the one sonography in asymptomatic patient with the UPGO like sonography. So another indication is a symptomatic. Is by end of 1 or 3 month patient comes with the urine tract infection. Yes, there is a definite indication for the VCG. Then abnormal bladder or neurogenic bladder with the high post-void residual urine. When we see bilateral hydronephrosis, there also is a relative indication. In a duplex kidney, as lower moiety is associated with the reflux, it is indication for the VCUG. In uretrosil, again, there is a possibility of reflux in presence of diverticula, to get the idea about the diverticula, periureteric diverticula with reflux, and the urethral wall. And how we should do VCUG? It should be a fluoroscopic VCUG, which is recommended with aseptic precaution, atraumatic catheterization with a 5 or 6 French feeding tube, and water soluble contrast should be used with the antibiotic cover for a day 1 to 3 days, and slow filling with the gravity, not to be forced. And as we discussed in the last discussion, that we have to measure the capacity applying this equation. So in infant, if it is a 3 kg weight, then probable approximate volume is 20 to 25 cc, and we should not exceed that. And if the child is more than say age of 1 year, then you have to use the equation of age plus 2 into 30. So if it is a 2 years child, then 2 plus 2 is a 4 into 30, means it becomes 100 or 120 cc capacity. And mind that the bladder should be filled with under the gravity and not with the force. Next investigation in our algorithm is the diuretic renal scan, and most of the time I get this question that which scan is we have to recommend, because for many years we were used to do DTPA renal scan, but here Professor S.S. Joshi was go on insisting us that MEG3 or EC scan is much and far better. There are reasons for that, and if you will inquire, you may not get MEG3 scan as it is very costly and very uh, at very rare place it is available. But EC scan is very much possible. Even if you ask in nearby radionuclide center, you will get the answers in a positive answer for EC scan. Why we have a choice of MEG3 or EC? These are the tubular extract, most of it bound to protein, so most of intravascular, and is having a high plasma clearance rate. So most of isotope get extracted from the blood in two passes. So there is a least background activity and sharp images. Problem with the DTPA is that advantage with the DTPA is it is widely available and cheaper. But the problem or limitations that it is a glomerular extract, though it gives GFR, that's the advantage, but the low plasma clearance rate, and because of that it undergoes many pass before it get cleared from the blood, and also it remains in extravascular space, so poor on account of background activity. So whenever possible and whenever available, technetium EC scan is to be preferred for purpose of diuretic renal scan. And this was proposed by the Conway in 1992 and Gordon in 2001. That is considered as a standardized diuretic scintigraphy. So patients should be well hydrated. We have to encourage the parents to give mother to give more and more feeds, because most of the time they carry the belief that they have to dehydrate the child before major investigations. But in that case we have to positively instruct them to give as many as possible breast feeds or oral feeds. And still if the child appears to be dehydrated, then many the intravenous administration of IV fluid. Furosemide is to be given with a radioisotope of the choice, and the protocols are maybe F minus 15, F0 or F plus 20. I in my practice most of the time follow F plus 20 protocols. I allow dilated pelvic LSA systems to get filled up with the radioisotope as much as possible, and its maximum within almost 20 minutes, and at that moment give the injection Lasix in a dose of 1 milligram per kg. So, and then we have to take the further films as well as post void and in erex posture films. If we are not going to go in much detail about the benefits and the uh, disadvantage of all this protocol, but F minus 15 is having a problem with the bladder will get filled up very quickly, and likely that the child void on table and there will be interruption during the study. But F0 is quite okay, because we are giving isotope along with the Lasix with the isotope. So if the IV line is very difficult, if it is difficult to maintain, we will not be having a problem. That is advantage. And second is that bladder is not filled up and causing inconvenience like F minus 15. But if you look at the literature, more or less it doesn't make much difference in the our uh, uh, so far so uh, clinical understanding or investigation understanding is concerned. Bladder catheterization is not necessary except in cases of associated with the reflux or dysfunctional voiding or neurogenic bladder, or you can say ectopic kidney sometime, not to mislead with the activity in the ectopic kidney and the bladder together. And delayed post-void film is necessary, which is very much important, and we have to uh, keep the patient in upright position to get the maximum benefit of gravity drainage. Along with this, bladder should be emptied, because that improves the drainage. Both these act improves the drainage. And what should be the timing? it is better to postpone until the neonate is 1 to 2 months of age because of immature tubule and function. So here in this patient, this diuretic renal scan was done at 3 months. There you can see that split function uh, on affected side is 42 and another side it is 57 something, and diuretic curve shows the obstructive pattern, but there you can see cortical transit time is not increased. There is a homogeneous appearance of the radioisotope into the pelvic LSS system, as well as there is no delay in appearing of the radioisotope in PC system on either side. So this patient was kept on observational protocol. And now something more in detail about this renal scan, radioisotope renal scan, is that what differential renal function. It corresponds to the time interval when the radionuclide localize in the tubules. So its abnormal value points to obstructive nephropathy, and relative function is reasonably accurate if the function is assessed in first 2 minutes. Here it is very important to draw the region of interest, and most of the time it is perinephric, but if the kidney is too much dilated and pelvis is too much dilated, then there can be a ROI which is drawn in a subpelvic area also. I'm not expert on this, but whatever I have learned, it is my learning is contributed by the many lectures which I have attended of Professor S.S. Joshi, and if his health permit, will invite Dr. S.S. Joshi to speak on the radionuclide renal scan sometime. And another parameter which we discussed just now is the diuretic curve. This is the normal values. That T half means the disappearance of the half of the radioisotope which has appeared into the PC system, that is considered as the T half at that time. If it is more than 20 minutes, it is suggestive of obstruction, like here in this particular frame. This is obstructed. 15 to 20 minutes in intermediate, and less than 15 minutes which is there in a non-obstructed system, which is non-obstructive or normal. But these criteria are in none of the book it is mentioned that it is laid down for the neonates and infants. These are the criteria are very age old. Most probably it was proposed by the O'Reilly in 2003, and at that time still we were not having a detection of EPJO like condition very frequently in neonates and the infants. So it is not possible to apply this criteria, and we cannot even take the decision based on only on the diuretic obstructive diuretic curve. We'll see this in detail in my subsequent presentation. So in this patient, as we followed, you can see that here at the 6 month apart, this was at the 6 month age, further dilatation reduced, and this is recent USG sonography. There you can see that only minor pelvic dilatation is there. Cortical growth is very good. There are no chalazial dilatation anywhere. So this patient treated by observational means, and what is the premises of observational treatment is that it is explained by the cough that it is interplay uretropelvic junction drainage is interplay between the pressure generated in pelvis against the resistance at the uretropelvic junction or upper ureter. So any increase in GFR, which is increasing till 2 year, because the GFR of neonate and infant is quite less in compared to the adult, it can only match almost at the age of 2 year with the adult GFR. So till 2 year there will be gradual increase in of GFR, and with that there will be increase in urine output. So that is one of the factor increasing pressure into the pelvis. And second is the compliance of the pelvic wall. At the time of birth, pelvis is having a high compliance, but over a time the compliance of the pelvis reduces, and that is how there is a more pressure is generated with the increase in volume which is into the pelvis. So these two factors together responsible for increasing the pressure, and that can overcome the resistance at the uretropelvic junction or upper ureter, and that is how this transient hydronephrosis disappears with the increase in the age. So at the end of first case, I would like to quote these questions which I am getting very frequently, because this lecture I have almost given in last 5 years at 8 to 10 meetings or conference. That most common question is there any need of VCUG, which I think I have answered very clearly. And again, I am repeating that if your serial sonography, which is done with the full bladder, and if at bladder level, at the retrovesical space, if lower ureter is not seen dilated, then we can skip or we can avoid doing the voiding cystoscopy. And in that circumstances, if you are missing that reflux, probably that reflux is not clinically significant. The second most question I'm getting is there any need of repeat renal scan? My answer is no. Because renal scan also involves a lot of radiation, though it doesn't involve the gonad, that is the advantage, but still the radiation is almost 50% of the whole year radiation the child is getting in from the in a naturally from the nature. So till you are not changing the line of treatment from observational to operative based on the serial sonography, there is no need to repeat the scan. And third is how to follow this child. We can do just 3 to 6 month ultrasonography with the clinical examination and urine examination for presence of pus cells and any palpable lump or any obvious signs and symptoms. And with that, there is a 3 to 6 month sonography till the age of 2 years. And then we have to take a call according to the findings of examination and sonography. And which scan is better, that we have discussed already in detail. And this is something about the limitations of diuretic curve, because many of the time I have seen that many of the urologists are taking decision only on based of the obstructive curve in the patients, not taking into the consideration much of the sonographic finding as well as the differential renal function. Now, what are the limitations in this with the diuretic renal curve is that there is a reservoir effect when the pelvic size is very big, and most of the time, if it is extrarenal big pelvis, then this is going to be more applicable. That here you can see that it is normal size pelvis with without obstruction, so there is a normal drainage pattern is there. Here again you see that external pelvis which is dilated but not obstructed, but as it is there is a reservoir effect, it has to get filled up to certain extent to generate that pressure because of pelvic compliance, and then it will start get drainage. So there is a plateauing effect here and then subsequent drainage. So it misguide you here. And even if the pelvic dilatation is much severe with the little bit of high insertion of the ureter, then this reservoir effect will be compounded, and there you can see that there is a persistent upward curve is there or operating curve is there. There also there is no obstruction. So we have to keep this fact in the mind while we uh, look, and this is possible only if we take sonographic finding into the consideration while we see the radioisotope scan in its curve. Other factors which can affect the diuretic curve is that their neonates and infants having a immature glomeruli, so their tackling with the radioisotope is different in compared to the adult. As we discussed, GFR is less till the age of 2 years, so there is a less urine output. Their response to the Lasix is different in compared to the adult. Again, postural, we have to have upright film to get the best benefit of the gravity drainage, and post micturition also very important, and hydration. So these are the factors, and on that basis, on that uh, this diuretic curve do not only obstructive diuretic curve as a finding in neonates and infants do not carry much importance in decision making. This is the second case where you can see that antenatally there is a cross hydronephrosis. Here the nephromegaly is there in compared to the opposite side. One second thing is pelvic calyces system completely dilated, including minor calyces, and there you can see epidiameter is almost 25 to 30 millimeter. With that, nothing was mentioned about the ureter. Ureter was not seen dilated, and bladder was normal. Opposite unit was normal. There, this is the first week USG, as we decided that we don't do till 5 to 10 days, and you can see at first week the findings are the nephromegaly 20 millimeter pelvic dilatation with all calyceal dilatation. Cortex is all right here in this first week film. Ureter not dilated, and then you can see that in the 6 week sonography, uh, there you can see that pelvic thinning has appeared in this particular case at 6 weeks. So there it becomes indication for early renal scan. So this patient was advised to get the renal scan, diuretic renal scan at 8 weeks. And there you can see that split functions, though it is normal, curve is obstructive, and there in the post erect and post micturition film in upright position and post void film, there you can see that more than 50% or most of the radioisotope is retained into the pelvic calyces system. There you can compare it with the bladder concept with the bladder. So here we have a situation. This slide is from the Dr. Gyanendra. So once again, thanks to Gyanendra. If split function is 40 in this kind of a case, the things becomes very straightforward. Then it is considered as obstructed, and we go ahead with the pyeloplasty. But when it is more than 40% in this kind of a cases, we have to take into consideration increased dilatation, which we are seeing here on USG, in serial USG, and then what? Then comes the cortical transit time, CTT, or tissue transit time, TTT. So it is a time taken by the isotope to transit the parenchyma and enter the renal pelvis. In a normal kidney, a rapid transit with more or less a homogeneous kidney filling in about 2 minutes, and a delay which is more than 3 minutes and inhomogeneous appearance suggests the obstruction. Now, for example, here if you see in this picture, there is a up to this level, means 7 to 8 minute level frames, the isotope appeared in inhomogeneous pattern, as well as there is a lot of delay in appearance. In this particular patient, this is the frame of this patient. There you can see that here there is inhomogeneous appearance. Again, here it is inadequate as well as inhomogeneous. Here also. So definitely the cortical transit time in this particular case is more than 3 minutes, which is considered as a significant prognostic factor, or you can say significant indicator for the likelihood of need of surgical intervention or early surgical intervention. Here you see this is the first week sonography. This is the 6th week sonography. There you can see increase in dilatation of pelvis as well as minor as well as major calyces, and there you can see increase in cortical transit time. And this patient was taken for the pyeloplasty at the age of 12 weeks or 3 months once, and there you can see a long atretic segment is seen, which confirms the presence of uretropelvic junction obstruction. Here you can see the long atretic segment. And then uh, what is the difference between these two? Uh, uh, Concentrating in, if you look at the renogram, the kidney is having a two main function. One is filtration and concentrating, and second is the excreting ability. Now, concentrating ability is represented by the differential renal function, and excreting ability of the tubules, or we can say cortex, is represented by the cortical transit time. So once again, cortical transit time is considered to be abnormal when the renal activity is limited to the cortex and not reaching to the pelvic system within the 3 minutes. And what is its significance? The question is, can CTT be reliable predictive factor for functional deterioration? The answer is yes, that abnormal cortical transit was the only predictive factor of differential renal function deterioration in cases managed conservative. So if you have a case like second case which we have already discussed, where there is a morphological changes are very rapid increase in the pelvic LSS system dilatation with split function still more than 40%, you have to look at the CTT. If the CTT is more than 3 millimeter, it is definitely predicting that this kidney is likely to deteriorate. This kidney's differential renal function is likely to deteriorate if you wait for too long. So once again, I'm coming to the commonly raised issues at the end of second case, that is diuretic renal scan. How early? Most probably, I think we have discussed this, that preferably at the 2 months and preferably in 3 months in a premature child. A newborn, again lower GFR. GFR gradually increases during the first 6 months to 2 years. Immaturity of the kidney, the tubular function may be reflected in the renogram pattern, and that can lead to the prolongation or plateauing, unnecessarily suggestive of obstruction. An immature kidney is unable to respond to diuretics, and premature infants should be even older than 2 to 3 months. So very important that this immaturity of kidney may be reflected in renogram pattern, which can lead to the prolongation or plateauing. Another question, that how early pyeloplasty? In my practice and with the advice of Professor S.S. Joshi again, that I avoid preferably till the child attains 6 kg of weight or cross the 3 months of age, whatever early, considering the anesthesia related issues and the risk. And another important area of discussion is that will you do additional radiological examination like CT IVP and or RGP? Now, I have a big no for the CT IVP. Unfortunately, I, Professor S.S. Joshi, and many of the Gyanendra and many of us are gone speaking on this issue of avoiding the CT IVP in these particular cases. But unfortunately, we are not getting that much of feedbacks that, or we don't see that change in the practice that people are avoiding CT IVP in this age group of patients like neonates and infants in this UPGO like condition. CT IVP is not having any role. Instead of that, it gives tremendous amount of radiation to the boy and it exposes the gonad with the heavy radiation dose. So if you want by chance some more anatomical detail, yes, there is agreement. No, you may not be comfortable with the going ahead with the surgical, excuse me. So if you still want some more anatomical details, yes, you may. But in that case, limited plate IVP means single or two plate IVP, which is carried out at 15-20 minutes, or second maybe at 40 to 50 minutes, maybe more than sufficient, and having a significantly less radiation in compared to CT IVP. And additionally, we can do, avoiding all this IVP and CT IVP, we can, if you are not we are still uncomfortable, we are uncomfortable on anatomy, then prior we start the pyeloplasty, we can give a lithotomy position, and with the pediatric cystoscope, we can do retrograde study to look at the where exited the pelvis, how long is the obstructive segment, and all those things. So in my practice, I don't do any of these things, and I don't regret, and that is what I have heard most of the time Professor S.S. Joshi repeating this statement. Another case, that is a third case, which is bilateral antenatal hydronephrosis. This is the antenatal, you can say, sonography, where both the kidneys are showing the hydronephrosis. Bladder was normal, ureter not assessed, and there you can see the bladder is normal. And this is postnatal sonography. There you can see left kidney with the pelvic LSS system dilatation in anteroposterior diameter in the axial plane, and this is the right kidney, again pelvic LSS system was dilated. So don't forget, again I am repeating, to see patient with the full bladder in sonography, during sonography, and insist the sonologist to give this picture. And we have to rely on this sonologist, as over a time we become expert in some particular field. Similarly, they can also become expert of this field if we go and feed the cases to the same sonologist, appreciating their work. Maybe you will find that the sonography is more than sufficient to get most of the anatomical information or morphological information. Again, as this is a case of bilateral hydronephrosis, though the ureter was not seen dilated, bladder was normal, we can still we can avoid the VCUG. But in this patient, I did a VCUG. Here you can see there is no reflux. Then this is the renogram at 2 months age. Generally, in patients with the bilateral hydronephrosis, we tend to do renogram little early. So this is 2-month renogram. But the problem here is, you see that the split renal function is same, 50-50% on the both the side. There you can see, but the cortical transit time is almost same on both the side. There is no any deterioration or increase in the cortical transit. So we can definitely observe this child as it is asymptomatic, no UTI, renal function normal, creatinine normal, and CTT is normal. So this patient was kept on observational protocol, and there you can see in a 6-month follow-up, this right kidney hydronephrosis completely disappeared, and the left side it is minimized. So the why I incorporated this case is, there is no need to hurry it up when you see bilateral hydronephrosis. If uh, if you don't have much of cortical thinning, as we don't see much of the cortical thinning here. Secondly, if your follow-up sonography is showing the same kind of dilatation or regression in the dilatation, and you have a cortical transit time which is normal, in the normal range, not increased, then you can safely observe this patient and can have a result like this, where patient is saved from the surgical intervention with the excellent spontaneous regression of the dilatation of hydronephrosis. And uh, against this case, this is the fourth case. There you can see that again bilateral hydronephrosis in the third trimester, which was picked up there. You can see in postnatal, at almost at birth, you can see the same kind of dilatation postnatally in the first few days, and then this is a 3-week increasing dilatation, mainly on the say right side, and then this is the 8 weeks dilatation. And then this is the right kidney, which is appearing more pelvic dilatation with the chalazial dilatation. And then the renal scan, again, the split function is almost 48-50, almost in the same range. But there is some delaying in the cortical transit time on the right side, and retention of radioisotope was much more on the right side in the post erect post void film, and that's why the right side was operated and left is kept on the follow-up. So the questions which I get frequently here in the bilateral UPGO is that how to interpret renal scan in patient with bilateral UPGO like condition. My answer is that except one of the kidney very much deteriorated functionally, it is very difficult to comment on renal scan. In follow-up, we can use DTPA because DTPA gives also GFR along with the split function, and on the side where the GFR is reduced, that consider is to be more affected side because of obstruction, and that can get the priority for surgical intervention. So in my understanding, DTPA is having a role to play here in this condition of bilateral hydronephrosis of UPGO like. And otherwise, serial sonography is which one is the decisive investigation. I always say that the serial ultrasonography with the eye on morphological changes means increasing pelvic LSL dilatation, appearing of the cortical thinning, like these are much more helpful in taking the decision. And if necessary, when you would like to operate, that already we have discussed. So that that brings me to the few concluding slide, that how we change. As you've seen, till 2000, we were not talking about the uh, transient hydronephrosis or too much of spontaneous resolution. And in 2010 guideline of EAU, ESPU, EAU, as well as of Indian Pediatrics, Indian Nephrology, uh, we started talking about the transient hydronephrosis, keeping it on top. This change is based on the certain excellent work done by the Ullman, that it says that the progressive decrease of hydronephrosis during first 2 years, and the basis which we have already discussed. So increase in GFR, increase in output, compliance of the renal pelvis reduces. That is how uh, more pressure is generated into the pelvis, which can overcome the resistance at upper ureter or at the pelvic level, pelvic ureteric junction level, and there can be a gradual regression of the hydronephrosis. That is how it is possible. And the second work is the increasing renal function in 15 out of 16 patients who were kept on observational protocol. Now here, COF kept 16 patients on observational period, treated with the only aim to observe till the DFR not reduced to 30 to 40%. And he said that when they intervened, the 15 patients uh, recovered completely. So this study, I sorry for this, that this was a much bigger study, but the 16 patients while observation, they had a deterioration of renal function of less than 30 to 40 on affected side, but with the surgical correction, 15 out of 16 patients improved. So the conclusion was that there is a scope of observational treatment, as a large number of patients or more than 15% patients can have an advantage of spontaneous resolution. And by the chance, while we are following this patient, if we have some deterioration of renal differential function up to the extent of 30%, then still it can recover. And this is the excellent work by the H.K. Dhillon from the Great Ormond Street, uh, which is correlating the pelvic dilatation with the chances of surgery. So less than 15 millimeter pelvic dilatation, chances of surgery is hardly 1%, but with the 15 millimeter pelvic dilatation, the surgery is almost 100%. So if we look at the uh, say 20 to 30 millimeter of dilatation, we can say that more than 50% patient is having a chances of spontaneous resolution and having a role of observational uh, treatment. So uh, at the end, we can conclude that what are the prognostic factor for surgery? Absolute prognostic factor, we can say that the renal function less than 30 to 35% to begin with. Second is epidiameter more than 30 to 50 millimeter, along with the problem with the renal function with the dilated calyces. That can be second uh, absolute prognostic factor. And third is the cortical transit time, which is less than 3 minutes. So these are the absolute prognostic factors which can determine or we can lead us to the surgical intervention. In the rest of the patients, we can definitely keep the patient on observational protocol. And the careful observation in neonatal hydronephrosis is possible with in a stable clinical status, no appearance of UTI, no pain, no lump formation. In a stable morphological pictures, sonography is suggestive of the same findings or regression in the dilatation. And third is in a stable good renal function. And so this is the algorithm which generally I follow, that we can say that if it is SFU 0 or APD less than 7 mm, no intervention, only one sonography, and most of the time we see the resolution. If it is SFU 1, 2 or APD 7 to 9 millimeter with mild hydronephrosis, you have to repeat the USG at 1 and 3 to 6 months. If maybe it resolved, if there is a worsening, we have to send the patient for diuretic scan here at that time, and we have to take the decision accordingly, the diuretic scan which we have discussed. And if this moderate to severe hydronephrosis, or you can say SFU grade 3-4 or UTD P3, their APD is more than 15 millimeter, then diuretic scan early and the surgical correction or USG at 3 to 6 monthly based on the outcome of the diuretic scan. And if there is a hydronephrosis with dilated ureter, we have to subject the patient for VCUG. If no reflux, we have to do diuretic scan, and then we have to take a call. If there is a reflux, we have to put the patient on antibiotic prophylaxis, and we have to consider the DMS scan. And if on VCUG we find out infravesical obstruction, we'll not talk right now. We'll discuss in third part, where I'm going to cover the posterior of the valve after a few days. So in nutshell, these are the indications for pyeloplasty in neonates, or you can say infant, that at initial diagnosis, presence of symptoms, solitary kidney with hydronephrosis suggestive of significant obstruction, bilateral hydronephrosis suggestive of a significant obstruction based on the three parameters of symptoms, morphological changes, and the differential function or cortical transit time. And third one is the differential renal function of obstructed kidney less than 30 to 35%. While we are keeping patient on observational protocol, what are the indications to change on the surgical management on follow-up? That increasing renal pelvic dilatation in serial sonography, and second is the reduction of 10% of differential renal function. So that concludes my presentation on UPGO like sonography, and there I will take one or two discuss one or two cases related to the other causes of hydronephrosis. Here this is the case of primary obstructed megaureter. There you can see that patient was picked up in the antenatal with the antenatal hydronephrosis. Bladder was normal, amniotic fluid was normal, and this is the postnatal sonography. There you can see the kidney is dilated, PC system is dilated, ureter is dilated, which is more than 10 millimeter at the retrovesical area in full bladder. And then in this case, we have to definitely go ahead with the voiding cystoscopy to rule out presence of reflux. And there you can see that there is, as there was no HUN, as there was HUN, lower ureteric dilatation of 10 millimeter and a history of UTI, we have to do VCUG, and there was no reflux. There you can see here, if you look this sonography carefully, you can see that there is a smooth tapering sort of thing in the ureter, which is quite suggestive of presence of obstruction or VUG obstruction. And then diuretic renal scan at 3 to 4 months. There you can see curve is obstructed, split function is of less than 40%. There also you can see in the pelvic LSS system in the ureter more than 50% of the radioisotope is retained in compared to the bladder, and there was history of UTI, so there is a indication for going ahead with the surgical intervention. But otherwise, as per the AUA 2020 guideline, 75 to 85% of the patients can have a spontaneous resolution of VUG obstruction, or you can say obstructive megaureter. The indications for early intervention are urine tract patient present with urine tract infection or palpable kidney, split function of less than 40%, and deterioration of USG in follow-up scan. Here you can see this patient is having a UTI as a presentation and less than 40% split renal function. So this we go ahead with this surgical intervention. There you can see clearly this narrow down, or you can say aperistaltic or narrow terminal ureter, which is inserting into the bladder, and proximal to that there is a hugely dilated ureter, and on cutting from there you can see that there is no jet of the urine, and this patient had an extravesical reimplantation, and this is the at 3 months post reimplantation. You can see that completely hydronephrosis has disappeared with the hydroureter. Now, this is one way to go ahead, but in literature, what are the possible methods to tackle with this condition is that one is the reimplantation, another is a refluxic reimplantation. Since last say 4 or 5 years, we have a number of papers on the refluxic reimplantation and old age ureterostomy. Recently, I had a very sick female child with the precious child after the IVP, twin children, and had a very morbid condition. So I had to go with the ureterostomy only. But at times you can consider the refluxing reimplant also. And what exactly the refluxing anastomosis is that transecting the ureter proximal to the obstruction and then just do a end-to-side anastomosis in a refluxing manner with the bladder dome. And patients are placed on antibiotic suppression following the surgery, and subsequent open definitive surgery is performed through the same incision at the age of 1 or 2 years of age. But in many studies, they observed that 50% chances the patients might not need second surgery even. And this is the another case of a 2.5-year male child referred with complaint of recurrent febrile UTI since last 6 months. No history of constipation, clinical examination normal, urine positive for pyuria and bacteria, serum creatine 0.4 milligram, and is on antibiotic prophylaxis. There again you can see that full bladder sonography. So go and insist your sonologist to give you pictures. One second thing, full bladder sonography as well as empty bladder sonography. There you can see with the full bladder in this behind the bladder, you can see this dilated ureter, lower ureter, and then at the upper end you can see dilated perivicular system with the cortex well maintained. This ureter dilatation was of almost 8 millimeter. And there we have to do voiding cystoscopy. So this is the voiding cystoscopy picture. But here my question is that will you suspect coexistence of UPGO here with the reflux? So when to suspect? This entity is suspected when the degree of dilatation in renal pelvis is disproportionate to that of the ureter. Here you can see that, and the contrast does not fill the renal pelvis, but here it is filled, but it may possible sometimes with the tight UPGO it may not fill. That is more possible with these both are together as a primary, and second, that is the it doesn't get empty completely even with the emptying of the bladder. So most of the contrast get retained into the pelvic LSS system in that circumstances. So there we have to suspect about these association. And what are the incidences? When the primary diagnosis is UPGO, the incidence of VR is around 10%. But with primary VR, we have a UPGO chances almost of less than 4%. But these two can coexist as a primary, or there can be UPGO secondary to the high grade reflux, or you can say pseudo UPGO secondary to the high grade reflux. So in this patient, as we were suspecting, and how to rule out whether it is both the primary or UPGO is secondary. Again, here we have to do diuretic scan, and we have to remember that we have to keep the catheter doing diuretic scan as there is a reflux. Here it was done in split function was on the right side less than 40, little less than 40, and left is 60%. GFR was significantly reduced on the right side, and these are the delayed scan with the catheter in the place. Here you can see that there is almost complete drainage in the delayed plate of the radioisotope from the pelvic acid system, and there you can see do the limited plate IVU. This is the 15-minute IVP with the catheter in bladder, and this is kind of integrate study. You can see that in compared to this VCUG film, most of this dilatation regressed or disappeared. This kink almost disappeared, and that gives the clue that this UPGO-like condition was there. Kink was there because of high-grade reflux, and that is the secondary UPGO, or you can say pseudo-secondary pseudo UPGO because of high-grade reflux. And the surgical management differs here because in these circumstances, we have to go ahead with the reimplantation first rather than the pyeloplasty. But then with that, we have to explain that a fixed kink may develop later, leading to the true secondary UPGO, which can require surgical correction later on. I operated this patient before 2 years, and this patient is doing fantastic. I have this patient's MCU as well as IVU film, limited IVU film, but misplaced somewhere. So this is the last case, just to compare with the previous case. There you can see this was antenatally detected hydronephrosis. This is postnatal sonography. There you can see the lower calyceal, lower pole is showing some dilatation of pelvis as well as peripheral calyces. So it gives some idea about the possibility of the duplex system with the lower moiety dilatation. And then here, as we have a lower moiety dilatation with the ureteric dilatation, we have to do voiding cystoscopy, as there is high chances of having a reflux with the duplex system. And there you can see there is a reflux, and contrast is reaching into the pelvic calyces system. But if you compare with the previous case, that reflux grade is very low. There is a disproportionate dilatation of the uretropelvic junction, and in the empty bladder, most of the contrast is getting drained from the bladder and the ureter, but almost all contrast retained into the pelvic calyces system. So here we have to suspect, in compared to the previous case, the existence of both uretropelvic junction obstruction in lower moiety as well as the low grade reflux together as a primary, and the obstruction carries much more importance or emergency to correct in compared to the low grade reflux. So in this patient, you can see that in a follow-up sonography, there is increasing dilatation here. Then renal scan was suggestive of all obstructive things, and this patient was operated. There was a closing vessels responsible for the obstruction of the lower moiety uretropelvic junction, and that was corrected with the Anderson-Hines procedure. The reflux was treated conservatively and disappeared within another year. So this brings to me the conclusion of today's session. And once again, last thing which I would like to highlight is that CT scan. The CT scan is, as you've seen in my presentation, in none of the place, though we discuss almost 7 or 8 cases, in none of the place we've seen any importance or any need of CT scan. So please avoid the CT scan whenever it is possible, or whenever it is not absolutely indicated or hard, very much indicated. And so we can avoid as almost all anatomical and functional details available in most of these cases, though they were complicated cases. If you still need, you can go ahead with the limited IVP or RGP, which is having a much less radiation in compared to the CT scan. And this patient unfortunately was having a CT scan, which was done at the age of 5 months. There you can see nicely all these things which you want to see, anatomical variations and anatomical problems, all those things, but you cannot comment about the function again. And but you see that I managed this case without looking into this CT scan. And unfortunately, this patient before came to me had a 2 or 3 more opinions, and there was not only one, but there were 2 CT scans done at 2 different places. So that is what the take-home message from me is, that utilize the radiation involving investigations in neonate and infants at the least, and that is how you can help these children. So thanks once again to all of you to join in this uh, session and talk. Once again, I thank you, ULTOI, specifically Nitesh, to arrange these uh, lectures one by one to keep all of us creative and busy in this lockdown period, or you can say that most difficult period which we are all witnessing in our probably life time. And I wish all of you maintain your health and take care of yourself. All the best to all of you for your health. Tomorrow we have Dr. Kulkarni will be talking on one of the subject of related to the stricture. So stay tuned with us on ULTO as well as euroacademy.org. And also I request all of you to register on euroacademy.org website to have some excellent materials as well as the case discussion posted by our mentors like Professor Venugopal and S.S. Joshi sir and Pankaj Maheshwari and many more. Thank you very much.